box a little bit. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. All right, our demonstrator tonight is Chris. Everybody should know Chris. He was our past president a couple years ago. He's had a number of different positions. He was treasurer, he's president, and
VP.
He hosts the pizza party. He and Marge host the pizza party every year. Local guy from Fort Collins. So tonight he's going to do a demo on carving and piercing. So welcome, Chris. And I bought 5 boxes of cookies because I wanted to support Sarah, and I'm going to pass them around so everybody's going to eat cookies on me tonight.
Yay.
That set the bar pretty high.
Okay, so I'm going to do an intro to carving and piercing for wood turners. So my assumption is that you haven't done any carving before. I'm going to have a fair amount of, spend a fair amount of time on layout and presentation and things like that because, well, I'll give you a really good example. I absolutely love the bottom of this bowl and how it came out and the color and everything. And when you put it on a table, all you see is the boring side. And that's really easy to do with something like this. So if you're going to carve something, it ought to be something that someone's actually going to be able to see. So, you know, think about those sort of things. So I'll be talking about what equipment you need to carve and to pierce, how to get started, a little bit about technique, some about layout, and again, I'll talk about aesthetics and how that works. I'm relatively new to piercing. I'd sort of asked to originally do this in August, but there was this hole in February, and so I'm about 6 months sooner doing this than I'd originally planned. So I'm pretty proud of what's coming out of my work here, but you're going to see some really fabulous things later in this year from some of the other demonstrators. So this is sort of a stepping stone to get started. So anyway, I want to start with the normal safety thing because we ought to just do it. So this is my absolute minimum safety piece, and there's absolutely no excuse why anyone can't have at least this. So if you look in the little corner here, I don't know which one we're on, it says Z87 Plus. The Plus is the impact protection one, okay? If you go, when you get home, get your safety glasses. If it doesn't have a plus on it, the trash can's right there. These things you can get, 10 of them for $20 at Amazon that meet the specification. There's no reason that people that are having stuff that's going to fly in your face shouldn't meet, the spec. I'm a big proponent of protecting your lungs, protecting your ears. I have to protect the dust in my shop because my wife's studio is right next door. I mean, literally on the other side of the door, and if I don't keep it immaculately clean, I get a visit from the boss. Okay. The other thing that I believe in is if someone like Wayne is going to host us and this place, as he has for so long, we try to give him some business. So here's just an example of a woodcraft product. This is the CVS Eclipse respirator. This particular one is really good for carving, especially when you get to the high-speed carvers that kick up smoke, because right on the shelf is the ones with the carbon filters in it that take out the smoke as well as the regular particles. And so this is like $30 maybe to get a P100, which is a really high grade of filtration, and a pretty nice mask. So last time I checked, they still have these here, and as a matter of safety, just use it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about carving. This is such a big topic that we can barely talk about it. So this is probably my simplest carving that I have. And let's see, how am I going to show this? Put me over here. So, of course, it's walnut, so it doesn't show very well, but I've got, some nice little curved things. It was a boring walnut bowl, so I just added a little bit of carving. So we're going to figure out how we can do that today. But, here's how you turn something really simple and just give it, a little pop. There's lots of other embellishments you can do on the lathe, but, diagonal lines are just not the thing that most lathes do very well. So let's, we'll work on that shortly. Boring wood and difficult wood is often prime candidates for carving. So if you have a really beautiful piece of wood, well, turn it into a really beautiful vessel or bowl or whatever. If you have a really nice piece of wood that's really boring, give it a nice shape to present it, and then put some embellishments on it to turn that boring piece of wood into the next level. So, don't take your most beautiful piece of rosewood or whatever and do a whole bunch of stuff that makes it so that you can't even tell it's rosewood. Difficult woods, you got this big crack in the middle of the thing. If you can turn it, then you can carve around it and turn it into something really, a lot more interesting and fun. So carving allows you to sometimes use wood that maybe you couldn't use otherwise. So I'm working on a piece right here that's in process, and there was a couple little sort of holes and things, and I just aligned the piece so that they went away. So, yeah, they are on the floor. Well, they're now in the trash can. Okay, so wood selection. So I took the Neil Turner class at the Wersing's house. This is the second piece I did. And the first piece I did was supposedly soft maple. That little piece of soft maple was the hardest damn piece of wood that I have ever carved. I got it done, but dang, it took a long time, and it was really, really difficult. And I'm not much for swearing, but that one was pushing the limits. So softer woods tend to carve better. If you're practicing, softer woods are a great way to see what you can do, and so on. So keep that in mind. Okay, the other thing about carving is it's harder to do on round than it is on flat. So start on flat and learn the techniques. You're going to screw up, especially when you're getting started. Beth is looking at me because she's the master carver. And she has a very different style than I do, and I appreciate it because she gives great ideas that I never thought about. I hope I give her a few ideas eventually. So what are good woods to carve? Well, the classic wood is basswood or linden, which is really soft. I don't know how good it turns, but you can do stuff. Redwood. Yeah, redwood. I've got a couple pieces here of aspen. Aspen's a real mixed bag. These are the really soft ones. I would generally go to something a little harder. I had a whole bunch of walnut, and walnut carves beautifully for the most part. Cherry carves really nicely. Soft maple, emphasis on soft, can carve really nicely. The nice thing about those 3 woods is they're 3 different colors, so it gives you a lot of natural, choices there. Cottonwood's not bad. I've not done much with cottonwood, but I'm guessing that it would be actually pretty good. I mentioned I have some aspen here, and the problem with aspen is, first of all, it cracks way too, you have to treat it immediately and then let it dry and so on. But it tends to be real stringy, and it tends to have horrible tear out and so on. In some way, as does cottonwood probably, yeah. Sometimes carving can help, but my rule of thumb is if you can't make it smooth to start with, don't try to carve it to smooth, because it ain't gonna work, Normally, when you carve, you want to either carve the entire piece or carve a well-defined piece, because the transition between carving and not carving can look really rough unless you do something about it. So my first prop here today is, if you can flip over here. So this is using the classic Alan Jensen technique. I don't know if Alan, he's still here, where he puts a nice little lip on here, and then he takes his various mechanical tools and puts good dimples and things like that on it, or uses a bit of pyrography to make grass and cattails and things like that. But this is also a good palette for carving because you have defined edges. The other nice thing about this is, in this case, I would probably have left the bottom on this when I'm carving, because when you got something with a fairly tight edge on this, it's really easy to go, oops, and ruin your whole friggin' piece because you put a nice little gouge on this nice smooth part. So if you leave it so you can put it on the chuck, or leave it on the chuck and do one more little pass on it when you're done, that's always a good tip. So I'm going to give you about a zillion of those little tips today to think about. Okay, so that's one. It has a nicely defined area. You can just figure out what to carve with that. How about this one? Okay, so I've got 2, or if I want, 3 beads on it. So what would we do with this? Okay.
Basket weave in between the 2 top beads.
You could do basket weave in between. Stippling would be really nice because it's well defined. And again, if you've still got the check on here, you can just clean up your beads a little bit, when you're done, to make it look really nice.
Just segment it out and remove some of the beads and leave proud beads.
So Bob says segment out and leave proud beads. So let's talk about that a little bit, because this is something to keep in mind. My first thought on this was to make the bead into like a rope, so you do lines. Well, I don't know about you as other carvers, I keep looking at Beth, that's really hard to do. And what's hard about it is when you get down to this little join right here, your tool is suddenly way too big, okay? So it just doesn't work very well. On the other hand, to take this off and make it flat and then kind of round it, you got a lot better access. So one of the big considerations with power carving is the burr has to be able to get where you want to cut. So if you have a real narrow hollow form and you're trying to get it from the inside, you're not going to be successful. If you have funny angles, you have to think about beforehand how you're going to go and get the carving you want to do with it. So taking a bead to take stuff away is not too bad, but to do real careful things is pretty difficult. So That's something to keep in mind. The fact that we have 2 of these beads leaves a perfect area to do smaller sort of embellishments and things. So let's talk a little bit about smaller embellishments. These were, I think, both from the Jacques Vessery class that I took. So he was here last year in September. And I know they're flat pieces, but I just want to tell you there's a million different things you can do with just, seeing. You take something like this, if I can get it out of the box, which is usually my biggest challenge. You know what? Here's my little box of bits. So you just randomly take one of these out, put it in the tool, and try all different angles with it and see what you get. And one of those angles is going to look really cool, and you can make little dimples with it, and it'll make nice textures, and just go from there. And next thing you know, you've got your little bit of carving. So this is just an idea of what you can do. This has a little bit of paint and so on mixed in with it. This one that looks like bark actually used a combination of pyrography and carving, but just some ideas of what you can all do when it starts coming to embellishment type carvings. Okay. So what does it cost to get started in carving? Well, that's not actually true. He asked if you have to ask, you can't afford it. How many of you have a Dremel somewhere in your shop? How many of you don't have a Dremel in your shop? Okay, well, Alan, they're pretty cheap. Yeah, so a Dremel and a $10 purchase on Amazon is enough to get you started carving. I mean, literally. So I just showed you this little box here, and I'm going to do this about 100 times today. This is the $20 set because there's 20 bits in here. The little bit bigger and a little bit smaller. But if you want just the big ones, it only costs about $10. So the Dremel carries an 1/8-inch shaft, and you can get a set of 10 assorted carbide carving bits for about $10 on Amazon. And
The right demo, they come with a sample set.
there you go. So, it even comes in a nice little plastic box, and, away you go. So that's what you need to get started in carving. I'm assuming you have the wood, so I'm not counting that as part of the price. Okay, so what do you do next? Well, as you get going, the first thing you're going to find is the Dremel's about this big around, and you want to do some fine work, and the darn thing is interfering with the angle that you want to reach and so on. It gets difficult. Well, there's a simple solution for that. It's going to cost you $20, $25. You add a flex shaft to it because the flex shaft is a much smaller thing. And if you have a low ceiling like I have, then you need a screw and a little piece of cord to hang your Dremel so that the flex shaft comes down nicely to your piece of work. If you try to turn the flex shaft and do sharp turns with it, it's not going to last very long. Okay? So if you like to do big things, then you can use something like this. Okay, this is the generic equivalent of what's called a Fordham tool. And this takes, whatever size you want, but it'll take up to a 1/4-inch shaft. So you can use, larger bits, things like, this, which will really let you hog stuff out. theoretically, these have quite a bit more power than a Dremel and things like that. But they're kind of wonky to use. I just don't like them very much. But if you're going to do, let me hang this back up. Oh, if you get one of them, you also want a speed control. Okay, most of them don't come with it. They all come with foot pedals, and you will have leg cramps to beat the band if you try to use the foot control. So get a manual control. This thing's like less than $10. So if you're going to do some bigger pieces, you might want to consider getting something like that. And again, you always want to hang these, and you want the flex shaft to be comfortable in your hand on the piece of work you're working on. Most of the time when you're carving sitting down or at a comfortable bench where you can see it fairly close to you. If it's a larger piece, you probably have it still in a chuck. Trent Bosch makes a wonderful multi-directional thing that you can use to carve, especially for larger, heavier pieces, doing larger kinds of cuts. But again, you want the flex shaft to be relatively straight, you want it to be comfortable, and you want it to be right near you where you're working, because there's a lot of detail work with carving. This piece here, this was Roberto Ferreira's class, and making these, this guy's a little dusty, making these sections here and these sections in here were much, much easier with a bigger kind of hogging tool, where you can take quite a lot of material off. I actually, if I were to do this again, would put even deeper grooves in here, so all the more need for something like this. So this one's not one of my more perfect pieces, but gives you an idea what you might want to do with this. So I talked a little bit about where you're working and how you're working. I'm going to jump all over the place, but I'm taking you on a path, so trust me here. When you're carving, it's a pretty intimate sort of experience. It's going to be right in front of you. You're going to lay out what you're going to do usually. Now, some people, I mean, I hate to call them this, artsy-fartsy types can go and work on a piece and it'll look good. I generally make a little more regular, or I write everything out beforehand. If you want to just grab something and start carving, you will probably make the classic mistake, which is you start at this size and you end at this size, and because we're doing round pieces, when you get around to the other side, all of a sudden nothing matches. So there's a lot to be said for, consistency and layout beforehand. You can modify as you're going along, but if you go completely just random and say, well, I can do this, so on and so forth, my experience is it just doesn't work very well. So think it out. Think about what problems you're going to have. Think about what access you need to the piece, how you're going to do it, so on and so forth. Okay. And part of that's going to, what I'm going to talk about next is layout. So this is here we go, back to go. This is what I call a pseudo-random piece, okay? So it looks like I did it randomly, but the fact is it was all drawn out beforehand, and I was able to figure out the spacings and so on, and I would leave a little more space so I could do a separate little branch and so on. So again, it looks like it's random, but it really isn't so random. So this is the piece that I'm really proud of, except that nobody can ever see it, so I leave it on the table upside down. but I'll let you look at that. And because I wanted more than just the ridges on it, I also added little dots and so on. If I were to do this again, I'd probably make a little more texture than I have, just a little heavier texture. I'm really happy with it, but you know, you always say, well, what can I do better the next time? You'll also notice that my rule of thumb is, if possible, make it handleable. So I like to make it so you can do it. Okay, so let's do the most simple layout possible right now. Okay? We're going to have to get this. I'll let you figure out how to do that, Dave. Okay, so we're starting to spend money now. Blue tape, French curves. There's at least $10 involved here. Okay, I sometimes draw curves, but I draw them on paper. And then I left it in the box. I'll draw something on paper and get the curve I want, and then I will cut that out and I'll put it on cardstock. Now, cardstock for me is the roofer visits you and gives you one of those folders that they put all the stuff in. That's my cardstock, And so, so you cut it out on paper, the shape you want, and you set it on the cardstock, and you hold it real carefully, or you tape it down, and you draw that line, and then you cut out the cardstock. Here is my library of cardstock. So, is that showing up pretty well? So these are our curves and things, and as you can see, I have, as you can sort of see, I have a lot more of them. So I did a lot of these. This one's a dual-sided one. You can see I've got 2 sets of curves. And I do a lot of these. I start with a French curve on a piece of paper. I didn't bring, oh, I will. Yeah. So my piece is, about that big. I've got a piece of paper here. I'm using this one because you'll see later why. And I'm a pretty good curve drawer, I think. But, maybe you want something about like that. Well, that'll fit on there all right? Okay? So that's how simple the process can be. If that curve looks really nice to you, go with it. If not, the old French curve is really, look at that, almost perfect. So I drew a French curve, and what I love to do is do combinational French curves. So I'll take this, and then I'll take something like this, and I'll just take the end of that and draw like that, and I'll make a nice combinational curve. So a couple of curves and just a little drawing, and pretty soon you've got what's going to become, the curve on this piece. Okay. Now, the next thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to draw that on the wood. Okay, so you're going to take this curve. This looks like a good one. And I'm going to put it on there, and it's too long, right? Okay, well, that's where the magic tape comes in. So sometimes I do this directly on the French curve. I take the part of it that I like, and I can do 2 things. I can just mark this like this. And those are the two sides. Or I can just tape it and say, well, okay, that's the end of it. And do it like that. Okay? And so I've got a reference point. I'll mark on the wood here. Okay? And somewhere here I have a little ruler. And I'll say, I'm going to go, let's just do 1 centimeter between. Hopefully I can do 1 centimeter. Can you see this okay? Okay, and then I drop that right in here again. And I draw that curve again. Blah, blah, blah. Rinse and repeat. Okay, so really simple. Okay, now I'm going to get out my carving tool, and I guess maybe I should just do that. I talked about Dremel as a way to get started. There's sort of a professional version of a Dremel that's called a micromotor. Are many of you folks familiar with the micromotor? Yeah. So I think Elizabeth Weber was the one that kind of introduced me to micromotors because, one, they run a lot smoother than Dremels. They're a lot quieter. And they don't have a flex shaft that isn't really all that flexible. So here's my micromotor. This thing costs about $350. Now you can get started for about half that much. So, you know, don't panic at the price. I just dropped a small little burr somewhere. Hopefully we'll find it. I see it, thanks. So, so the nice thing about a micromotor is it's small, it doesn't weigh too much. This is a brushless motor, and what you get with the more expensive ones that have a brushless motor is they tend to be quieter. They tend more often to be sealed, so dust doesn't get inside the motor, so they last much, much longer. And they tend to have somewhat higher torque. Okay? Now, there's a fundamental relationship that you'll find on all these things, and that is generally the faster you go, the less torque you have. Okay? So a thing like that, the Fordham back here, tends to be pretty high torque. You can take a pretty good chunk out of stuff when you're doing it. You can throw a lot of dust around, and you can use a fairly large bit. When you go to smaller sizes, you're going to have to use a little more finesse with what you're doing. It's not saying that it won't move relatively quickly, but if you really abuse the thing, it's not going to last very long because they don't really have a whole ton of torque. Now, the bit I have in here is a little, what's called a saber tooth. And a saber tooth, they look like little porcupines. They're carbide bits. Kutzall makes a similar set of products, and half the world swears by one and half swears by the other. But for quick rough out work, they're fairly invaluable. Now, I'm going to sacrifice my lungs tonight to show you how to do this. The one thing about the saber tooth and the Kutzall is they are speed limited. So Fordham will typically go to 25 or 30,000 RPM. Dremels typically will go to about 30,000 RPM. Micromotors start at about 30 and go to 50,000 RPM. Most of the saber tooth and these rough out tools, you don't want to go over about 15 or 20,000 RPM. And I do not want to have little carbide spikes testing my Z87 Plus glasses to see if they're really going to work. So every time I turn this thing on, I check the speed and make sure you're at a reasonable speed. When you start doing the sanding work, the little sanding discs, you're typically down around 5,000 or 6,000 RPM. If you run those at 20 or 30,000 RPM, your sanding discs become very small discs very quickly. So keep the speed in mind. It's really nice if you get a model that actually tells you how fast it's going. Okay, so enough talking. So I'm going to do this, and the first thing that you might think you want to do is run a line right across, a cut right across your line. What's the problem with that? You don't have a reference anymore. You don't know where you're going. So carving tends to be a between the lines activity. So let's just stop talking and start carving. Okay, so I already did one here, and I can just do a little bit more. And if I don't know if you can tell, but I'm coming more or less right up to that line. I'm taking lots of fairly light cuts there. And again, I don't know how much you can see the Is that working? Okay. Okay, so in that much time, I have the basic shape for that much. Didn't really take too long. If you look at it, it's really rough. What you'll need to do next is come in a little closer, make those lines appear really thin. A lot of times you think you did a great job and it's deep enough, and then when you're all done, you wish you'd done a little bit more. By the way, you all know that if you're doing a bowl, there's a other side to the bowl. So if you're coming down through, a quarter of an inch, you better make sure you have more than a quarter inch of thickness. Because when you go beyond that, you've entered the realm of piercing. Okay? And so you should probably enter piercing really thinking you want to do piercing. So anyway. Yeah. So this particular one does have a piece of masking tape. And this was a Neil Turner little gadget on here. This is a little blower built into the piece. Now, especially for the kind of slower pieces where you're running 15,000 RPM or so, the tape works pretty well. You just cut some little strips and you flip them on there, and away it goes, and it helps clean all the gunk out for you. I, by the way, also have a box fan that I usually put next to it, but I was afraid the camera work wouldn't work very well with it, especially when you get to turning or high-speed stuff where it makes smoke. It's really nice to get the smoke out of there so you can see it and it's not burning your eyes and all that. But the little flag there, this one probably needs to be replaced. It's getting pretty small. Okay, so I've got a piece more or less done. Here's another nice thing about it. Notice that was just a quick turn. On the beast back there, I have to get out my chuck wrench and undo the old one and put on the new one. So I'm going to grab, this looks like a good piece. So I'm replacing a round with a roundish piece. Okay, so this is one of those $1 bits that I got at Amazon or wherever. And I can crank up the speed, so I'll run it up to 40,000 RPM. Can you hear it? It's a whole lot quieter and faster. And this is where I get all the rough stuff out of here. So what used to look, I'm taking all those little roughies out of my saber-tooth work. Now notice that I turn the piece around constantly. These things turn in a clockwise direction. They are meant to go from right to left. You try to go left to right, your results will vary. There are actually a few places where that can come in useful. On some of the piercing work, if you want to clean up the burn afterwards, you can run that bit really softly back across it, and it just, rather than cutting in, it kind of pushes away and allows you to take that char off without making much of an impact on the piece. But for 90% of what you do, you just do fairly soft, and you're doing, you know, right to left. So, what do you think? I'm not there yet, but it's not looking too bad, is it? Okay, so that's about what it takes to start carving. Okay, I'm going to turn the speed way down and go. Okay, so we did this on, let's do one other piece. Well, actually, I'll just do, so does this look vaguely familiar? Okay. Same general idea. Again, this was from Elizabeth Weber. You know, we got the milk paint and so on. But this gets a little bit into selection of bits. Now, I'm not going to really talk about selection of bits much because the best way to learn it is to try them. And you'll learn a whole lot as you try them. So let me start on this little one right here, and I'll just use the bit I have. And let's see what we get. Okay, so I wish I'm going to redraw my line a little bit. So I picked this light color wood because I figured you probably a much better chance you could actually see what I'm doing. A lot of stuff is in walnut here, and it is really hard to see the lines. Okay, so my point here is that you can actually get fairly into the corners here, even with a pretty round bit. Now, again, this is probably the worst ergonomics I've ever used in a carving session, but that's what demos are for, right? But you can see that that shape is coming along pretty well with the pretty round bit. Okay. I'm trying really hard not to be a perfectionist here so that we actually get done with this sometime tonight.
Chris, you mentioned playing with different bits.
Mm-hmm.
Different bits are going to give you a little bit different ability to get into the corners and
That's correct.
texturing and all that other stuff.
So let's grab another bit.
Ever go to hand carving?
The question is, do I ever use hand carving to smooth things? So that Roberto Ferrero piece, the one that's the walnut kind of big bowl, had actually quite a bit of hand carving in it because it is virtually impossible to get into some of those nooks and crannies. And so it's just much easier to get you know, to have a chisel set and do some fine work with it and things like that. So there are definitely times when you want to do some handwork. Some things you can get in with files and things like that, but that tends to be, you know, some finishing to go with it. Okay, this is what's called a stump cutter. It's got a nice sharp edge on it, and I can use that to get in and get sort of this sharp line here. So, you know, organic shapes are nice, but there are corners in things, and sometimes something like this is good to get into some of the corners. And a little sharper definition a lot of times for some pieces really makes them pop. So something that's got a sharp edge on it can be used to do that. The big mistake that I made and some people make is you think that something with a point on it like this, zoom on that, that you can just go in and take it straight in and do this. It doesn't work. There's a couple problems with that. One, it's turning, so it's trying to go the wrong direction. Two, that point, even at 50,000 RPM, is not really moving very fast because it's such a small diameter. And so you're sitting there going, and nothing's happening, so you start moving it and it moves the wrong direction and it just doesn't work. So having a little bit of diameter helps a lot when you want to make sharp edges. So that's why they cut the tops off of these things. And remember what I talked about earlier with Dremels, when you're coming in and the big tool can kind of get in the way? Well, that's part of the reason why you want a smaller tool, because you have better access to what you're doing. Okay, how am I doing here? I got about 45 minutes, 50 minutes left. Okay, things are going well. Okay, any questions so far? We haven't done anything on anything round yet, so let's do some layout on. No. Almost any time I'm going to do anything on round, I'll do something on flat first. And don't be picky about the wood. Get a scrap of wood that's similar to what you're going to turn so you know how it feels, but you can pretty much practice on anything. Okay. Let's see if I can just put them away real quick. Bear with me, but if I don't keep it semi-neat, I will not find it the next time I need it. So okay, just check my notes here, see how we're doing. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to turn this way. This is obviously not a bowl, but I did this so that you could see it, and I made it really simple. Notice there's no place for the chuck on here yet, but I have a couple of simple tools. This is a wonderful tool from Mr. Doug Schneider. It's an indexing tool. You probably have indexing capability on your lathe, but it's usually really cumbersome to use. And something like this, $150-ish. Is that right, Doug? $150-ish? Or best offer. Is it causing trouble? I don't need the light for this, so we'll take it off. Okay. So we're going to do some layout, and this is a theoretical bowl we're working on. I made it really simple. I got the chuck out of the way so you can see it. Okay. I have here a flat tool rest, and I found this in a estate sale, and I really like it. If you don't like it, or if you can't find one of these, it's a 1-inch dowel and a flat piece of wood, and you can curve it if you want. Doug has fixtures to sell you to do that as well. But I have this, and I'm kind of cheap sometimes, so I did that. So you're going to carve a certain part of your piece. So the first thing that I usually do here is I draw my limit lines. Okay, so I've got a piece that freely moves here, and let's say I'm going to do, that's my bottom. Move this back a little bit. So I lay the pencil as flat as possible on here, and I've got my 2 limit lines. So I'm going to carve between those 2 spaces. Okay? So how am I going to do that curve? These darn French curves only curve in one dimension. They don't curve around your bowl very well. Okay? Yep, that's why we do cardstock. You don't need cardstock so much when you're doing flat work, but when you come to bowls, these things don't work very well. So you go and you draw your picture, and you cut out your curves. Okay, let's see if I can find a good one to use here. This is pretty small. Another thing you can use to consider is you can use a laser. You can mount a laser on here and find a nice angle, and sometimes it'll make a really nice curves on here. So something else you can consider doing. So I'm going to put this on here. I need to find a curve that I like, but how many do I want to draw on here? Okay, well, you need to decide that. So what did I do with this? Probably right here. Okay, what did I do with this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 came out. Pretty good spacing. You can do more, do less. You know what's really nice about 6? Divides really easily into 360 degrees. Okay, so let's do 6. Okay, so we know we're going to do this. We're going to figure out how, but let's put some reference marks on first. Okay, so I've got 0 here. Doug's going to come up afterwards and say, "You use this thing all wrong." Okay, and I've got my pencil flat on here, and I'm going to draw a line. Okay, so I'm at 0 degrees, and you know, Doug didn't put all these nice numbers on here, so I did, because I got really tired of counting. So this is 60. If I can read my own writing. Here's 120. And actually, so
That's 3, so you need to go in between them.
oh yeah, look at that. What did I do wrong? Yeah. How did I manage that? Because I did it at 180 instead of 360 on here. I did 180. Okay. Yeah, exactly half off. Okay, so I ran it all the way across, and actually that might have been a little bit of a mistake, but it's a learning experience too. So we'll just go ahead and draw the lines all the way. 30, 60. That would be 90. I got 120 and 150. I bet we have 6 lines on here now. Okay. Pretty close. Okay, so let's figure out how we want to make this work. So I'd like something a little curvier if possible. Should we go that way, or should we go this way, or what do you think? Yep. You like that? You know what's really interesting about that? That went right from a line to a line. Okay, let's think out of the box too and try it steeper, less steep, because the bottom doesn't have to be, doesn't have to be exactly on that next line, doesn't have to be one above the other. And I can just put a little mark on that wherever I want and have it all done. But this one, it looks really good to go from this piece to this piece. I don't have to do anything special. I can hold that. And I can lose my pencil. Thank you. That's why I brought extras. Okay. Remember this thing? Okay, yeah, I'm going to make... You know what? That was really smart, Chris. I didn't mark where I was using it. See, you're learning with me. Now, how come that worked and that didn't work? Because it's a different radius, isn't it? Okay, so we're going to put that on there. And this one's going to be a little shorter. So we'll just keep the top reference mark and fingers in the way. Okay, so the other nice thing about Doug's little indexing system is it will hold it nicely in place while I do the next one. So I'm just going to do 2 of these. And let the rest be an exercise for you to understand. The other nice thing about wood is when you make a little mess up like that, erasers work pretty good on wood. Amazing how that works, right? Okay. Have you had enough of this yet? Okay. So we got our layout now. Okay. We'll finish that, do 4 more times and carve away. Okay. Again, this is out in space, so you're going to have to figure out how you want to finish those ends to make them look nice. So what I would probably do is bring this into some kind of point like that. I think you can see that. Yeah, so, to make it look nice. So, again, zillion things. Let your imagination run wild and have fun with it. I mean, that's the biggest thing, is just have fun. Okay. I didn't talk too much about how the bits and what bits are available and so on. I mentioned that the Fordham type tools can take 1/4 and 1/8 inch bits. there's two other size of bits available. There's a 3/32 bit, so it's a 32nd smaller than the 8th bit. And then there's a 1/16 or a 1.6 millimeter bit. The 1.6 millimeter bit with an adapter you can put in the micromotors, but I wouldn't really recommend it. That's why we do the dental tools and the piercing. The 3/32 ones become really useful when you get into piercing and if you do some really fine work. Also, there's some really pointy ones you can get and things like that. So if you start doing just embellishment like you're doing little dots and things like that, it's really nice for that. Okay. We've got enough time. So I'm going to do just introduce you a little bit more to the micromotor, which is also the Dremel, as to what you can do with various bits. So let's put this one back on the table. Not doing a whole lot of turning tonight, am I? Yeah. Okay. So let's grab a few rough guys because then you can actually see it more easily. Okay, nice soft piece of wood. Get the extraneous stuff out of the way. Let's see what we can make for fun little things. So, you all saw this bit. It's like a little, it's a little porcupine. So, let's take it straight down. Okay, so the first thing that you might smell is I'm starting to burn a little bit. So you're putting something straight down and running around and around and around, and guess what happens to all that wood that you just moved? It gets a whole lot of friction in there and starts doing stuff. But you also get some pretty nice texture in there. This is a pretty hard piece of soft wood. Okay. The other. Okay. So, I don't know how well that's showing, but this is making pretty nice little ridges on it. And I can go back and clean that top up, and I've got a nice little, moonscape or landscape I can make with these sort of things. So I can start combining various things and tools and so on and come up with some pretty interesting little projects. Let's do a pointy tool and see what it does. And we'll turn up the speed. So straight in. You see that thing? It just wandered like crazy when I did that. Okay. So it's going to take, can you even see it? Barely. Okay. Kind of my point. Really small tools run really close, make really small dimples. So for really fine work, something like this is fine. What this is actually really good for, if I can do it. I just cleaned up my previous piece. Okay? So these tools, these burrs will, they have quite a learning curve, which means an experiential curve to them about what you can do. There's other, which I didn't bring out. There's other ones that will cut lines for you. You can make curved lines, long lines, and, you know, just a zillion textures that you can make.
Do you have any of the cup cutters?
I have some little micro ones. Cup cutters are inverted. They basically make little spheres. So you bring it straight down and you go tsh, tsh, tsh. And if you ever want to make a moonscape, they're wonderful for that. And my suggestion is when you go get them, get the bigger ones because the little ones make really small little spheres, and you mix them together and they make some really interesting textures. Okay, this is my furrowing tool, I call it. And by the way, one of the pieces that I didn't highlight, there's a lidded box in the process that uses something not too far from this. So I'm not sure exactly what tool you use, but this might be the fast version of that. But if you want to make, I got a whole lot of fuzz here. Thanks, the basswood. If you want to make consecutive lines or textures like that, or the other thing you can do is do offsets. Or random offsets. And again, you're just trying to find really interesting designs you can do with it. Okay? This is the beginner class. I don't have time to go into a ton of this, and we're covering a whole bunch of other things. But again, just play with it and you'll find.
How many bits do you have?
I have never counted. I asked how many bits I have. Okay. Oh, yeah, Larry asked me to show this. So this is a little sander. They come in all different grits, and I can never, by feeling them, I have no idea if this red one on the floor is the heavier grit or the lighter grit or whatever. Someday I'll actually write them all down on a little reference card so that I know it works. Okay, so these tools you run a lot slower, and these are what makes your work pretty. So you get them way down, do a nice slow 5,000 or 6,000, and you clean up all your messes. I'm touching it so light that the torque is not an issue at all. Oh, brush motor? Oh, you have no torque at 6,000 RPM at all? No, this has got great torque. You know, that's a little funny because electric motor is supposed to have the highest torque at the lowest speed. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Yeah, that can be frustrating. But again, if you run these too fast, you'll have very short bristles on here very quickly. So as in all sanding, be really careful how you use this, or all that texture you just put in will just magically disappear. So, you know, think about, are you using this to take the ridges off, or are you trying to get the inside and get the little texture out? Really think about why and how you're using it.
Where did you get your system from?
The micromotor came from MDI wood carvers. There aren't very many. Josh, do you know anyone else who sells them?
You can order them direct from Ram Products. There's a couple dental places you can get them. I just
Mhm. Yeah, so this is a Ram Products Revolution 50. There's a couple of, about 3 manufacturers of quality micromotors. Micromotors are used extensively in the cosmetics industry when you go in and have your fingernails, your manicure, pedicure, and so on. And most of those are trash, and a lot of them do not support an 1/8" collet. So if you're wanting to save a few bucks, because you can get them for about $50, you better read the fine print real carefully, because you might have just bought something that you'll never be able to use. So you probably want to spend at least $150 and get one that you know will work. Okay. So we're going to start moving up in speed fairly quickly. When you're working with wood, remember it's got grain in it. And you'll find very quickly as you start carving, most of the stuff I've shown you so far tonight, just happen to be more or less with the grain. Guess what happens when you start crossing grain lines? It's not so smooth. You get resistance. Your nice smooth movements, all of a sudden it pulls them a little, so you got to slow it down a little bit. I forgot to show this, but when you're carving, you hold, I'll just take this off. Sure I will. You're holding the machine, but you really want to have an anchor. Your base of your hand, a finger, something, so that you can get the shape you want very well. If you don't do that, you're going to go straight into Randomville, and it's really tough. So, think about ergonomics when you're doing this. You don't want to sit on that hard bench when you're doing it. The other big tip I'll give you for carving is don't start late in the afternoon when you're tired, because your percentage of mistakes will go up exponentially. When I find I'm carving, if I start really fresh, I might be able to do 2 to 3 hours. If I'm in the afternoon, maybe an hour and a half or an hour. And most of the really big screw-ups I've done, I was practically falling asleep and I should have stopped a half hour ago. So it is a high concentration, a high visual concentration activity, especially if you're doing more intricate carvings, and know your limitations, because it will make a huge difference in your final. There's nothing more aggravating than being 70% through a piece and blowing a hole through it because you weren't paying attention. And it is way too easy to do when you're doing this kind of stuff. I didn't exactly hear what you said, but I'm sure it was you got a pizza oven. Yeah, I have burned a number of my pizzas. I do have a pizza oven, so right. Okay. Okay, any questions about general carving? Okay, this is an intro. I want you to play with it, have fun with it. Go big, go small, whatever you want to do. I'm going to head into piercing here soon, but I want to talk about speeds a little bit more. Okay, so I mentioned that a Dremel typically go around 30,000 RPM. These will go to about 50. When I get to the dental tool, we're talking almost an order of magnitude higher speed. These things start at about 200,000 RPM and go up from there. Okay, so they're extremely high speed, extremely small bit, extremely low torque. Okay, so You need to let the tool tell you how fast to go. That's true with all of them. More speed, you generally will feel less of the grain. Okay? If you have a big honking tool like these saber-tooth things, you just right through the grain. It probably doesn't matter. You're going a little slower speed. When you start using the carbide, smaller things, you do need to pay attention to that again, because it's nice to stay in the lines of what you're doing, and more speed usually helps you do that. But it also more likely is going to burn. So sometimes you'll go ahead and let it burn, run at a higher speed, and then you'll come back afterwards at a slower speed for your touch-up work and so on to kind of get the burn out. You just need to figure out what works for you, how fast, and so on. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about piercing. So this was actually probably my first real pierced piece. So this was Neil Turner's class. This was the exercise here was to turn a kind of goblet 3/8 inch thick. Okay? So obviously I'm not going to use the dental tool for that. We use the micromotor and even the Fordham. And by the way, most of these holes, I literally took a drill and a drill bit and started the holes and then expanded from there. Oh, thank you. And it doesn't show really well on here, but so when you start talking piercing, you have some decisions to make. And I'm not sure what the official term is. I think the official term is, are you making a closed form or an open form? Okay, so I would call this, go ahead and leave it in there. I would call this a closed form. You can tell that it's got holes in it, but you can't really see through it. Okay, so all you're looking at is the carving itself. This one, I don't think you look at the carving, you look at the overall effect it has. You know, this is a flame. You can envision that these are flames coming up, and you can see right through it, and you know what's there. So that's a very open form. Okay, so think about what you're going to do. You can hog out a whole lot more in an open form, but they're just very different. You can actually do some combination of the two, but I don't have any good examples of that because I'm just getting into that. Okay, but again, we're starting. This is large scale piercing. So I started with 3/8 of an inch wood, cut a whole bunch of this stuff out, used a drill, and again, I laid out all these flames beforehand so you get a consistent size. And then you just, you know, hope the thing has a nice clean drill when you bring it through and you don't hit the other side and so on, and pretty soon you get the feeling. But you probably don't want to use your oldest drill bits when you start cutting through things like this. There are also drill bits available that have the cutting on the front and then have this like abrasive thing on the back that you can run through and start hogging it out. Yeah, they're file drills. I haven't had the greatest experience with them. They're good for making your drill bit hole a little bit bigger, but they're not very good for really making the whole form. Just in my experience anyway. So the other nice thing about these larger ones is you all know how to make a 3/8 inch bowl or goblet or things like that. So it's easy way to start. The tools that I talked about will all help with this. If you have something that can cut a little faster, well, that's useful too. The other nice thing about 3/8-ish kind of things is you can play with texture of this is not a smooth surface. It's got texture within texture because you have depth. This thing is about 1/10 of an inch thick. There is no surface texture on this thing at all because you have no room for surface texture. So these are two very different kinds of piercings. And again, it's one of these where there's a million ways to do it, and you play with it and you see what works for you. So this is sort of big level piercing. I've not done a huge amount of this. It's fun, but I'll tell you, all these little edges in here, it's a heck of a lot of finish work to make this happen. And I hate to say it, but I finished this in 1/5 the time that I finished this, you know. So, okay, so we have big and we have small. Bear with me a minute as I do my next setup. Okay, I'm not sure how this locks, but oh, I got lucky. Okay, so I started this. Now, I turned this a week and a half ago, so we're going to see how far out around it went in the process. It's just amazing how do I have okay ha and how do I nope how do I lock this guy okay great I have zero experience with Powermatic, well, not zero, but not much experience with Powermatic lathes. Okay, so this is a piece of mystery wood I have. I think it might be elm. And we are going to make a thin piece today. And I somewhat purposely chose a piece that has some character in it, so it'll be a little more difficult to do. Okay, looks like we're all the way down. And, well, look at that. I didn't get a whole lot of warping. It's my lucky day. Okay, so I'm guessing if you haven't done piercing, you haven't done very many really thin pieces. So I'm assuming you haven't, so I want to show you a little technique because when I'm doing a normal bowl, I generally know that I'm about the same thickness, but I don't mic it carefully to do that. And when you're doing something, I try to get the ideal thickness for most of these pieces is about 1.5 millimeter, which I think is somewhere around 1/10 of an inch. And, you know, when you're dealing with those kind of thicknesses, you probably can't have, you know, a millimeter difference between the most and the least part of it. So it's good to be consistent. This is where Precision Tools come in, and I just love to give advertisements for local manufacturers. You guys know where these came from? Yeah. These are Trent Bosch tools. So I have Harbor Freight calipers, and when I do this, and this one's closed, there's about 1.5 millimeter space on this one. Well, when you have 1.5 millimeter vessel, and you're trying to get this, I mean, I could bend that thing back and make it right, but my confidence level is absolutely zero. So buy some good tools for this and you will get good results. Okay, so how am I going to figure out that I'm 1.5 millimeters thick? Well, I have this depth gauge here, and I use this for, how deep should I do my bowl so I don't go and make a funnel and so on. And it has a really nice, 64th on one side and 0.5 millimeter on the other. And, I can measure this thing and go, okay, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5 millimeters right now. But that's really, really hard to use when you're trying to get down. So I have a very expensive tool here to help me, because this tongue depressor or hobby stick from Hobby Lobby, I mic'd out, and Dave, it is 1.6 millimeter, perfect thickness for me. So when I'm on here and closing it in, I, whack away here until it comes right down onto that piece, and I know that I'm either really close or I'm there. So to me, that's a really nice tool. I use Laurents for smaller pieces and so on. Now, if you're going to do a piece like this, thanks Dave, that's pierced all the way to the very bottom, you're going to have to be able to mic the bottom of the piece too. And how's this going to be mounted? Okay, when I'm taking the last part of this off, I'm going to have this in some coal or jumbo jaws, and I have got to have access to it. So my my jumbo jaws here, usually when you use these, I just had the tool that I put. It's really easy at the beginning, and by the end of the demo, you've realized that you didn't put everything back. Okay, about like this is the minimum space that you want it to be grabbing onto your piece, because you have to be able to get your calipers through here to mic the bottom of the bowl. Does that make sense? Usually when you do these, you try to get them almost closed. That doesn't work if you really care how thin the bowl is. And when you're talking millimeters, you do care how thin the bowl is. So that's my next little tip is adjust. I've had a few times where it was right in between the spacing and it was like, is that still going to hold? Just check and start slow and make sure it's all going to work for you. Okay. How did I do that? Okay. I have to go that way. Okay. I made a ring and then marked the 3. Yeah. And then I used my carving tools to take that away. Okay. And don't look real careful, but I didn't make my nibs big enough on this one, so they actually don't hold completely. I should have made them slightly larger. But that allows you to carve the whole thing except for these little tiny spots. So, okay, so let's see if we can't just run through the process a little bit. So, I have a great big tool for a little tiny bowl here. Okay. had to turn the lathe on today. It is a wood turning group. So we all know you need to present it nice and flat. And I'm going at about 1300 RPM. Okay, sharpen it right before you start doing this thing because there's not a whole lot of room for error. Okay, so I've got the tip in there. I've got an edge. And when it gets thin, it wants to chatter real quick. And so I often will put on my magic gloves to help hold that a little bit. Okay, what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to taper it down here. I'm going to work on a little bit at a time and work my way in. And the reason you want to do that is there just isn't a whole lot of strength there. You don't want the thin here to be supporting the somewhat thick here. And in fact, I'm going to give you a perfect example of what happens when the thin further this is aspen, so it was weak to start with. This was my worst case scenario. So I have my, isn't it fun when you get to show your mistakes? So I did both of these. One, I didn't have much in the way of open forms to show, so I wanted to do a couple of open forms. And two, I mean, I had a fairly short time to prepare for this, so I just took little things and did it. So aspen, as you know, is a really soft wood. It's not a very strong wood, and this is a bowl. Okay, so there's some real advantages to spindle turning because everything's running the same direction. So as you're getting thick and as you're carving, you're generally carving with the grain and you still have grain to hold what you're doing. When you're in a bowl orientation, you've got two sides where you are going directly across that grain. And when you get little pieces like that, you're expecting 1/10 of an inch by maybe, let's talk millimeters. You're talking 1 or 2 millimeters on a side, and that's supposed to hold things. Well, I got a little thin on the bottom here, and it was right through the direction that was the shortest grain. And you might notice that there's a little bit of gluing that was done here. So handle carefully, but it's a throwaway piece. So, okay, so I did that one and it broke. And it's like, okay, well, I got another bowl because it was the other half of that same piece. And so I decided to do this one. And this one, nothing's broken, but it has another problem. I made that one too thin. And again, you can see up towards the rim, it's a little thicker, and then further down, it's thinner. Again, I didn't start thin and work my way down. But because I broke that one, I was being much more conservative. And when I start piercing the bottom of this, I realized, well, I knew it before I started, that I overdid it and I didn't go nearly deep enough. And I just totally was fighting the tool the whole time because it was way too thick. So, and aesthetically, when you look at this, that one looks delicate. This one looks like a hack job. Okay, you have a way to judge thickness? Okay.
I actually drill through the piece
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
because you're gonna pierce it anyway.
If you know where you're going to go, or if you have some idea, just take take whatever size drill bit you want. Walnut is really nice because they tend to have natural holes in them, and so sometimes you can just use the existing holes to tell how thick they are. But
Drill all the way down the piece.
yeah,
And
if you just drill reference marks down the piece, then it will really help you. I still like to do calipers, but to get you near, that's a really good way to get you in the neighborhood, because I can't look at this and tell you exactly how thick it is, just right here.
3.5 is what I'm guessing.
Yeah. Okay, so I bet I've got a millimeter to go at this first part here. Okay, so I don't know if I'm going to do the whole piece, but I'm going to work on it because now you know the process. And again, I'm down to, in fact, I'm watching the clock, and I've done my turning. So the next thing I would do is, as I get down to about half a millimeter of the thickness I want, then I'll come in with a scraper to give me a little finer finish and to fine tune it and so on. But I will work maybe a third of this piece at a time as I'm going and get it pretty much down there, sort of taper it out and work it down again to keep it stable so that you can, so that you're not fighting the flex in the piece so much. I swear by Harbor Freight gloves to run on the backside, and as long as you put this down to like 240 or so on, when you first turned it, it's smooth enough that the friction's not maybe too much for your hands, but not too much for the glove, and all is good. Okay. So we have a thin piece now. I knew I was trying to cover a lot of things on this one. When I first volunteered for it, I said I would do carving and piercing. And then when I did my first dry run on it, I said I should have done carving or piercing. Okay, this is my magical dental piercing controller. I have a little reference sheet here that you can photograph. I have just a couple of copies. Assuming you're mostly AEW members, there's a good article that covers the stuff you need in order to make one of these. You can either have a friend as a dentist, or you can get this stuff on eBay. So yeah, Clarence, yeah. This altogether costs a little over $100. Okay? The original piercing tool that people use, the NSK thing, you're talking over $1,000 for one of those. So we're talking a whole order of magnitude difference. Now, if you're going to do this and you go on to eBay and you start looking for dental tools, what you'll find is 90% of them use steel bearings. You want ceramic bearings. If you have steel bearings, you have to oil them constantly, and you have to worry somewhat where that oil goes. I mean, it's supposed to exhaust out the back, but your hand's going to get, these things are too slippery already. Half the time I roll tape on them to give me a better grip. The second thing you want to get is you want to get one that's got a little LED in it, okay, right down here, because The biggest challenge with these things is seeing what the heck you're doing. Okay? You want light at the source, you want it close, you want to see it, and you will spend far more time fixing the places where you wandered off the line than you will doing the actual piercing. So you want to take it slowly, and you want to do it with precision when you first do it. Otherwise, you know, it's like sanding. It's just the same sort of thing. It's the carving version of sanding you're going to be doing to clean up all your messes. So you want a light on it so you can see well. You will notice if you do punky wood that pretty soon this thing will get all gummed up and you have to clean it. It's not hard to clean, but you know, take a look at it every once in a while and make it good. The typical dental tool, I have one here, but trust me, notice that this runs at a 45-degree angle. Ergonomically, to me, and the author of the article that's on here, this is much, much easier to use. Okay? When you're piercing, when you first go into the wood, and with almost everything on a dental tool, you want to be straight up and down, directly perpendicular to the wood. When you start angling, then all kinds of weird things happen. That's true of the micromotors, it's true of this. You want to go straight in, get it, you know, exact, and then work from there. You want to mark it so you can see it, and you will find the angle that works for you. Okay, I'm talking too much and showing too little, so.
So if you mess up, are you supposed to go, oops, just like the dentist does?
Yeah. Mess up. What? Me worry? I don't make mistakes. Those are design opportunities. Whoops. Okay. I have an extra pliers or clamp here somewhere. Oh, hello. I need one more hand. There we go. I decided that I would use the lathe as a stand rather than a table. Hoping this is working out for all you folks. Okay, so the reason you need this is you need to regulate the pressure carefully. So don't trust your compressor regulator to be quite right. Get a decent gauge, a decent regulator, even at Harbor Freight, and get a moisture filter, a good moisture filter, because you don't want any moisture in this thing. Okay, again, this is $100 including the fittings and the little turn-off thing. Maybe a little more than $100. Okay. So, I have pencils here somewhere. Under my...
Under the brush?
Oh, thank you. No. I'm going to show you this on paper first because
Soft wood.
it's a very soft wood and it doesn't burn as much. I'll show you the other. This is my practice. So we talked about flat stock. I got this in the table saw. It's a 2x pine, Douglas fir, whatever, cut to the right thickness. And you can do all kinds of fun stuff with it. The artist at work. Okay, if you are totally abhorrent of dental drills, your time has come. Tell me if this blows it out too much. Ooh, I'm almost out of time. Okay. Don't you love that sound? Okay. Is it without the light? Okay. Okay, so you want to, so I like to pull it towards me at like a 45-degree angle. Finger anchor, bring it in here, pierce it straight down, pull it towards you. See how fast that goes? Pretty good. I haven't hit the surface of the table yet. Okay, so that's how fast you can do this. Now, you'll notice that I'm mostly on the lines, but I got a little off here. I'm going too fast. You tend to go the speed that the material lets you go, and this has almost no resistance. Okay, let's use a piece of wood here. Okay, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the spaces in between. That? Ah. You know, I always thought I would be ambidextrous, but I never quite succeeded. Okay, I'm going to do the holes in between these because remember how routers go? This goes circular. The way you do holes is you start in a small space, like a corner, and you go clockwise around. If you want to go counterclockwise, it's like running the wrong way on a router and the thing tries to run off on you. You can touch up a little bit going the other way, but you always want to go in. Now we're talking smoke. Look at that. Don't be afraid to move the wood. Okay, now, of course you find that you didn't run it all the way through, but you have holes here. Okay, pretty simple, pretty fast. Again, if you get the depth consistent to somewhere more than a millimeter, less than 2¼ to 2½ millimeters, your work will be all will be good and it will be fun. So it's a 1.6 millimeter shaft, but the bit itself is probably about a millimeter. Okay? You use a long bit. There's different lengths dental bits. Use a long bit for this to make it work. And buy at least 5 at a time because you will, quote, burn through them.
Same question about burning through your lines as you're cutting out like you are. How thin can you get before you actually burn that string in between?
How fine can you go?
Yeah, it's just the process of doing it to find out when to burn through.
If you're running with the grain, you can get pretty darn small. If you're going across the grain or if it has to support any of the rest of the weight of the piece, you want to get quite a bit larger. Well, yeah, but you also want to make it a nice artistic piece. But I kind of feel like you got to find that balance between having enough structure that you don't feel like you can't pick it up. I like stuff that you can actually pick up. And you want the balance between that and you know, it looks delicate, and I think you can reach that.
Cut it a little lighter with that, and then you go back in and just kind of grind it back out.
Yeah, so what you tend to do, I am out of time. Okay. I was afraid this was going to happen. What you tend to do is go in, watch a lot, try to get a good cut the first time because it's a lot harder to fix. But you can use a little bit larger bit, like on the micromotor, to straighten out your lines if the hole's big enough. If it's not big enough, you tend to take the piece backwards through, and it'll clean it up, and you can get some of the char out, or you just run through the line again and try to get it nicer, better. Okay, we are out of time. We covered a lot of stuff, but I hope it was useful for you. Thanks.